The morning sun cast long shadows across the Afghan mountainside as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her position behind the rocky outcrop. Her breathing was steady, controlled, each exhale measured as she peered through the scope of her M110 semi-automatic sniper system. The weight of the rifle felt familiar in her hands, like an extension of her own body after years of training and combat deployments. Maria had earned her place among the elite marksmen of the 75th Ranger Regiment through sheer determination and exceptional skill. Growing up in a small Texas town, she had learned to shoot at age 8 when her grandfather, a Vietnam veteran, taught her to hunt deer in the dense pine forests. What started as weekend hunting trips evolved into competitive shooting, then military service, and finally this moment, perched on a mountain in one of the most dangerous regions of Afghanistan. The mission briefing had been clear but challenging. Intelligence indicated that a high-value target would be moving through the valley below within the next 6 hours. The target was a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces, and eliminating him could save countless American and Afghan lives. Maria's team had been inserted under cover of darkness, establishing an overwatch position that provided clear lines of sight across the entire valley. Her spotter, Corporal Jake Morrison, lay beside her with his high-powered binoculars and range-finding equipment. Morrison was young but sharp, with an uncanny ability to read wind patterns and atmospheric conditions that could affect long-range shots. The two had worked together for 8 months, developing the kind of wordless communication that only came from shared danger and mutual trust. "Winds picking up from the southeast," Morrison whispered, his voice barely audible even at close range. "Gusting to about 12 knots now." Maria nodded, making mental calculations. The target area was approximately 800 meters away, well within her effective range, but the changing wind conditions would require constant adjustment. She had made shots at much greater distances during training, including several successful engagements at over 200 meters during previous deployments. The rest of their 8-man team was positioned strategically around the mountain slope. Team leader Captain Richards had established a command post 50 meters behind their position, coordinating with helicopter support and monitoring radio communications. The other team members were spread out to provide security and early warning of any enemy movement that might compromise their position. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. The Afghan sun climbed higher, increasing the temperature and creating heat mirages that distorted distant objects. Maria remained motionless, occasionally shifting slightly to prevent muscle cramps but never breaking her sight picture of the valley below. This level of patience and physical endurance was something that separated elite snipers from ordinary soldiers. Around midday, Morrison suddenly tensed beside her. "Movement," he whispered urgently. 3 vehicles approaching from the north. 2 pickup trucks and what looks like an armored vehicle. Maria tracked her scope toward the approaching convoy. Through the magnified optics, she could see armed men in the truck beds and someone in traditional Afghan robes sitting in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle. The intelligence photos had shown their target wearing similar clothing, but positive identification at this distance was challenging. "Can you confirm identity?" she asked Morrison, who was studying the convoy through his spotting scope. "Negative. Too much heat distortion and they're still moving. We need them to stop." As if responding to Morrison's words, the convoy came to a halt near a small building in the center of the valley. Several armed men jumped out of the trucks, establishing a security perimeter while the passenger in robes stepped out of the lead vehicle. Even from 800 meters away, Maria could see that this person carried himself with the confidence and authority that matched intelligence descriptions of their target. "That's him," Morrison confirmed after comparing the figure to reference photos. "Positive identification on the high-value target." Maria's finger moved to the trigger guard as she began her shooting sequence. First, she controlled her breathing, taking several deep breaths, and then settling into the natural respiratory pause between exhale and inhale. Her heart rate slowed as years of training took over, shutting out everything except the target in her crosshairs. The target had moved to the center of the compound and appeared to be giving instructions to his men. This was the moment they had been waiting for, a clear shot with the target stationary and fully exposed. Maria began applying pressure to the trigger, gradually increasing force while maintaining perfect sight alignment. Suddenly, something felt wrong. The trigger, which should have broken cleanly at exactly 4 pounds of pressure, felt mushy and inconsistent. She tried again, applying steady rearward pressure. But the trigger seemed to stick and then release unpredictably. This was not the crisp, predictable trigger break she had experienced thousands of times during training in previous missions. "Problem with the weapon," she whispered to Morrison, temporarily moving her eye away from the scope. "Trigger isn't breaking clean." Morrison frowned, knowing that Maria was one of the most skilled marksmen in the entire regiment. If she reported a weapon malfunction, it was serious. "Can you clear it?" Maria performed a quick function check, cycling the bolt and dry-firing the weapon in a safe direction. The trigger mechanism felt gritty and inconsistent, nothing like the precisely tuned instrument she had zeroed and tested just hours earlier. Something was definitely wrong with her rifle, and the timing couldn't be worse. In the valley below, the target was beginning to move back toward his vehicle. The window of opportunity was closing rapidly, and without a functioning weapon, the entire mission would be a failure. Worse, intelligence suggested this might be their only chance to eliminate this particular commander, who rarely exposed himself so openly. "Captain," Morrison called softly into his radio, "we have a weapon malfunction. Sniper rifle is non-functional." The response came back immediately. "Can you repair it?" Maria was already field stripping the trigger mechanism with practiced efficiency. Even in combat conditions, she could disassemble and reassemble her weapon blindfolded. What she found made her blood run cold. Several critical components showed signs of deliberate tampering, small scratches and marks that indicated someone had intentionally sabotaged her rifle. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Someone on their own team, someone she trusted with her life, had deliberately damaged her weapon before the mission. But who would do such a thing, and why? The implications were staggering and dangerous. Not only was the mission compromised, but Maria now had to consider that they might have a traitor in their midst. "The weapon's been sabotaged," she reported quietly to Morrison, showing him the damaged components. "Someone did this intentionally." Morrison's face went pale as he understood what this meant. "Jesus, Maria. Who would—" "I don't know," she cut him off, "but we need to figure out our options fast. The target's about to leave." The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Their primary weapon was useless. The target was preparing to depart, and somewhere among their trusted teammates was someone who had deliberately compromised the mission. Maria's mind raced through possibilities, trying to understand who might have had access to her rifle and motivation to sabotage it. The weapon had been secured in the team equipment area during their brief rest period after insertion. Every team member had access to that area at various times throughout the night. The sabotage would have required only a few minutes with the right tools, and any experienced soldier would know exactly which components to damage to make the trigger unreliable. As these thoughts churned through her mind, Maria noticed movement in her peripheral vision. About 30 meters to their left, she spotted another member of their team in a concealed position she hadn't known about. Petty Officer First Class Daniel "Ghost" Mackenzie, a Navy SEAL who had been attached to their unit for this specific mission, was setting up what appeared to be an extremely long-range shot. Mackenzie was legendary among special operations snipers for his ability to make impossible shots at distances that most marksmen wouldn't even attempt. He carried a custom .338 Lapua Magnum rifle specifically designed for extreme-range precision shooting, and his reputation included several confirmed kills at distances exceeding 2,000 meters. Maria watched in fascination and growing suspicion as Mackenzie methodically prepared for what would obviously be an extraordinarily long shot. His target wasn't the compound where their original objective stood, but something far beyond it. So distant that she couldn't even make out details through her own scope. "Morrison," she whispered, "do you see Mackenzie's position? What's he shooting at?" Morrison swung his spotting scope toward Mackenzie's location and then tried to trace his line of sight across the valley. After several seconds of searching, his face showed complete bewilderment. "I can't even see what he's aiming at," Morrison admitted. "Whatever it is, it's way beyond our target area. Has to be at least 4,000 meters, maybe more." The pieces of a larger puzzle began forming in Maria's mind. The sabotage of her rifle, Mackenzie's mysterious positioning for an extreme-range shot, the timing of everything. It couldn't be coincidental. But what was Mackenzie really targeting? And why had someone wanted to ensure that Maria couldn't take her assigned shot? In the compound below, their original target was now walking back toward his vehicle. Within minutes, he would be gone, and their primary mission would be a complete failure. But Mackenzie seemed completely focused on whatever lay far beyond the valley, something that required the kind of shot that existed at the very edge of what was physically possible with modern sniper rifles. Maria made a decision that would haunt her for years to come. Instead of reporting Mackenzie's position to Captain Richards, she decided to observe and see what developed. Something much larger than their briefed mission was happening, and she needed to understand what it was before potentially interfering. The morning sun continued its relentless climb across the Afghan sky, and the desert wind carried with it the scent of danger and deception that would soon explode into violence beyond anything Maria had experienced in her military career. Maria's decision to observe Mackenzie proved to be one of the most important choices of her military career. As she watched the Navy SEAL through her scope, she began to notice details that painted a disturbing picture of deception and betrayal within their own ranks. Mackenzie's equipment was far more sophisticated than what had been authorized for their mission. In addition to his custom .338 Lapua Magnum rifle, he had deployed advanced atmospheric monitoring devices that could measure wind speed, humidity, barometric pressure, and temperature at multiple distances. This level of equipment suggested preparation for a shot of extraordinary difficulty and importance. "Morrison," Maria whispered, "can you get a read on atmospheric conditions where Mackenzie is positioned?" Morrison adjusted his instruments and began taking measurements. After several minutes, his face showed complete amazement. "Jesus, Maria, the conditions are perfect for extreme-range shooting. Almost no wind, clear atmosphere, ideal temperature gradient. It's like someone knew exactly when these conditions would occur." The implications were staggering. Weather conditions suitable for shots beyond 4,000 meters were extremely rare and virtually impossible to predict, more than a few hours in advance. Yet Mackenzie had clearly been planning this shot for much longer than their official mission timeline. Someone had provided him with detailed meteorological forecasts that went far beyond standard military weather reports. Maria began to understand that their official mission, eliminating the Taliban commander in the valley, had been a cover story for something much more significant. Mackenzie's true target lay far beyond their designated area of operations, in terrain that hadn't even been mentioned in their mission briefing. Using her scope's maximum magnification and following Mackenzie's line of sight, Maria finally spotted what appeared to be structures in the extreme distance. They were so far away that they appeared as tiny dots even through her high-powered optics, but their geometric shapes suggested human construction rather than natural rock formations. "I think I see his target area," she told Morrison. "Range has to be at least 4,500 meters, maybe more. Can you confirm what's out there?" Morrison consulted his maps and GPS coordinates while simultaneously trying to spot the distant structures. After several tense minutes, his face went white. "Maria, according to these coordinates, that's across the border into Pakistan. Whatever Mackenzie is shooting at, it's not in Afghanistan." The pieces of the puzzle suddenly came together with terrifying clarity. Mackenzie wasn't just participating in an unauthorized mission. He was conducting a cross-border operation that could trigger an international incident. The sabotage of Maria's rifle ensured that she would be unable to take her assigned shot, creating the perfect cover story for why their official mission had failed while Mackenzie accomplished his real objective. But who had authorized this operation, and why hadn't the rest of the team been informed? Cross-border operations required approval at the highest levels of government and military command. The fact that it was being conducted in secret suggested either extraordinary circumstances or a completely rogue operation. Maria's radio crackled with Captain Richards' voice. "Sniper team, what's your status on the primary target?" "Target is moving back to his vehicle," Morrison responded. "Weapon malfunction has prevented engagement. Target will be mobile in approximately 2 minutes." "Copy that. Stand by for extraction orders." Maria realized this was the moment of truth. She could report Mackenzie's position and activity, potentially stopping whatever operation he was conducting. Or she could remain silent and allow events to unfold, hoping to understand the full scope of what was happening. Her decision was made for her when Mackenzie suddenly began his shooting sequence. Even from 30 meters away, she could see the intense concentration on his face as he settled behind his rifle and began controlling his breathing. Whatever his target was, he was preparing to engage it immediately. The technical challenges of what Mackenzie was attempting were almost impossible to comprehend. At 4,500 meters, a bullet would take approximately 6 seconds to reach its target, dropping over 600 feet due to gravity, and potentially drifting dozens of feet due to wind conditions. The target itself would appear smaller than a pinhead through even the most powerful scope. Yet Mackenzie's reputation suggested that if anyone could make such a shot, it would be him. His military record included confirmed kills at ranges that most snipers considered impossible, and his custom rifle was specifically designed for extreme-range precision shooting. But even with perfect conditions and exceptional skill, a shot at this distance would require an element of luck that bordered on miraculous. Maria watched through her scope as Mackenzie made minute adjustments to his scope settings and rifle position. His spotter, who had apparently been hidden nearby throughout the mission, was providing wind readings and range confirmations through hand signals rather than radio communications. The level of operational security suggested that this mission was compartmentalized at the highest levels. In the valley below, their original target had entered his vehicle, and the convoy was beginning to move. Within minutes, the official mission would be a complete failure, providing perfect cover for whatever Mackenzie was really trying to accomplish. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. "Morrison," Maria whispered urgently, "I need you to record everything that happens in the next few minutes. Use your camera equipment and document Mackenzie's position and activities." Morrison looked confused but complied, activating the digital recording equipment that was part of their standard mission gear. If Mackenzie was conducting an unauthorized operation, they would need evidence to protect themselves from potential blame or legal consequences. As they watched, Mackenzie's breathing settled into the deep, controlled rhythm that preceded a precision shot. His finger moved to the trigger as he began applying gradual pressure. The next few seconds would determine whether one of the most difficult shots in military history would be successful or whether the entire operation would end in failure. The sound of Mackenzie's rifle firing echoed across the mountainside like thunder. The .338 Lapua Magnum cartridge was significantly more powerful than Maria's 7.62 mm ammunition, and the muzzle blast was visible even in broad daylight. The bullet began its 6-second journey across impossible distance, carrying with it the success or failure of a mission that apparently involved the highest levels of military and political authority. Maria found herself holding her breath as she counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. At this distance, even confirming a hit would be extremely difficult. 4, 5, 6. The bullet should have reached its target, but there was no way to immediately determine the result. Mackenzie remained motionless behind his rifle for several more seconds, apparently waiting for some kind of confirmation signal. Then, suddenly, his spotter began packing equipment with urgent efficiency. Whatever the result of the shot, their part of the operation was apparently complete. "Did he hit?" Morrison asked quietly. "No way to tell from here," Maria replied. "But look at how quickly they're packing up. Either it was successful, or they need to evacuate immediately." As if responding to her observation, Captain Richard's voice came over the radio with unusual urgency. "All units, prepare for immediate extraction. Priority Alpha evacuation protocol in effect." Priority Alpha was reserved for situations involving imminent danger to the team or completion of critical mission objectives. The fact that Richards was implementing it immediately after Mackenzie's shot confirmed that the Navy SEALs operation was the real purpose of their deployment. Maria and Morrison began packing their equipment while simultaneously trying to understand what they had witnessed. The sabotage of Maria's rifle, the cover mission against the Taliban commander, Mackenzie's extreme range shot into Pakistan. All of it suggested a level of planning and authorization that went far beyond their unit's normal operations. "Maria," Morrison said quietly as they prepared to move to the extraction point, "what do we do about what we saw? Do we report Mackenzie's unauthorized shot?" It was the question Maria had been dreading. Reporting Mackenzie's activities could expose a classified operation and potentially damage her own career. But remaining silent made her complicit in whatever had just occurred. The ethical implications were staggering, and the decision would affect the rest of her military service. We document everything and report it through proper channels when we get back to base, she decided. Let the intelligence officers and command structure sort out what was authorized and what wasn't. As they moved toward the extraction point, Maria couldn't help but wonder what Mackenzie had been shooting at across the Pakistani border. The target had been important enough to risk an international incident and sacrifice their official mission. Whatever it was, the consequences of Mackenzie's shot would likely extend far beyond their current deployment. The helicopter extraction went smoothly, but during the flight back to base, Maria noticed that Mackenzie and his spotter were transported in a separate aircraft. The segregation suggested that their part of the operation was being handled through different command channels, confirming her suspicion that multiple missions had been conducted simultaneously. Back at base, the debriefing for Maria's team was surprisingly brief and focused almost exclusively on the weapon malfunction that had prevented completion of their assigned mission. No one asked about other activities they might have observed, and Captain Richards seemed eager to conclude the session as quickly as possible. It wasn't until 3 days later that Maria learned the true significance of what she had witnessed. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value terrorist target had been eliminated by unknown means at a compound just across the Pakistani border. The target had been under surveillance for months, but diplomatic complications had prevented official action. Mackenzie's shot had apparently solved a problem that conventional military and diplomatic channels couldn't address. But the cost of that solution included the sabotage of Maria's mission and the deception of most of their team. The ethical implications would haunt her for years to come. The investigation into the weapon sabotage began immediately upon their return to base, but Maria quickly discovered that nothing about the inquiry would be straightforward. The damaged components of her rifle had been collected as evidence, but when she asked to examine them 3 days later, she was informed that they had been transferred to higher headquarters for analysis. Major Jennifer Walsh, the intelligence officer assigned to investigate the incident, was thorough but clearly operating under constraints that Maria couldn't understand. Walsh's questions focused heavily on who had access to Maria's weapon and when, but she seemed oddly uninterested in the tactical details of how the sabotage had affected their mission. Staff Sergeant Santos, Walsh said during their second interview, "I need you to walk me through exactly who handled your rifle from the time you arrived at the forward operating base until the mission commenced." Maria had already provided this information twice, but she repeated it patiently. The weapon was secured in the team equipment area overnight. All 8 team members had access to that area at various times. Additionally, the base armorer conducted a routine inspection of all weapons before deployment. "Tell me about the team members. Had you worked with all of them before?" 7 of the 8. Yes. Petty Officer Mackenzie was attached to our unit specifically for this mission. I had heard of his reputation, but hadn't worked with him personally. Walsh made careful notes but didn't ask any follow-up questions about Mackenzie, which Maria found curious. If she were investigating sabotage by someone within the team, the newest member would be an obvious person of interest. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Morrison was interviewed separately and asked specifically about what he had observed of other team members' activities during the mission. When Morrison mentioned seeing Mackenzie in an unexpected position, Walsh's interest seemed to sharpen dramatically. "Describe exactly what Petty Officer Mackenzie was doing when you observed him," Walsh instructed. Morrison provided a detailed account of Mackenzie's equipment and apparent preparation for a long-range shot. Walsh took extensive notes and asked for clarification on multiple details, including the direction of Mackenzie's apparent line of fire and the timeline of his activities. After Morrison's interview, Walsh requested individual meetings with each team member. The sessions were conducted in a secure conference room, and each team member emerged looking confused and concerned. Whatever Walsh was asking about, it was clearly more complex than a simple investigation into weapon sabotage. Captain Richards was the last to be interviewed, and his session lasted over 2 hours. When he emerged, his face was grim, and he immediately ordered the team to maintain operational security about all aspects of their recent mission. "Everything that occurred during our deployment is classified," Richards announced. "You are not to discuss mission details with anyone outside the chain of command, including family members and other unit personnel. This directive is effective immediately and remains in effect until further notice. The unusual security restrictions convinced Maria that their mission had been part of something much larger and more sensitive than originally briefed. Standard operations rarely required this level of secrecy after completion, especially when the official mission had been unsuccessful. 2 weeks later, Maria received orders to report to Fort Bragg for what was described as a specialized training opportunity. The orders came directly from Special Operations Command and included travel arrangements that suggested the assignment was both urgent and classified. Upon arrival at Fort Bragg, Maria was escorted to a nondescript office building where she met Colonel Patricia Hayes, a career intelligence officer with extensive experience in special operations. Hayes was direct but professional, and her first words immediately confirmed Maria's suspicions about the true nature of their recent mission. Staff Sergeant Santos, you witnessed events during your recent deployment that were part of a classified operation. I need to understand exactly what you saw and what conclusions you've drawn. Maria provided a complete account of the mission, including the weapon sabotage, Mackenzie's positioning, and her observations about the apparent target across the Pakistani border. Hayes listened without interruption, occasionally making notes but mostly focusing intently on Maria's words. Your observations were accurate, Hayes confirmed when Maria finished. The operation you witnessed was authorized at the highest levels of government. It involved eliminating a high-value target who was beyond the reach of conventional military action due to diplomatic constraints. The admission was both a relief and a source of new concerns. While Maria was glad to learn that she hadn't witnessed a rogue operation, the implications of government-authorized cross-border operations were sobering. Why was my weapon sabotaged? Maria asked. Why not simply brief me on the real mission? Hayes's expression became uncomfortable. The decision was made that plausible deniability required a genuine mission failure. Your reaction to the weapon malfunction and your team's response to mission failure needed to be authentic. The answer hit Maria like a physical blow. She had been deliberately deceived and manipulated by her own command structure to provide cover for Mackenzie's operation. Her reputation as a skilled marksman and her team's track record of success made their failure more credible and less likely to attract unwanted attention. Who made the decision to sabotage my rifle? Maria demanded. That information is compartmentalized, Hayes replied. What I can tell you is that it wasn't anyone from your unit. The sabotage was conducted by personnel specifically assigned to ensure operational security. Maria struggled to control her anger at being used as an unwitting pawn in a larger operation. The betrayal felt personal and professional, undermining her trust in the military hierarchy she had served faithfully for years. Hayes seemed to understand Maria's reaction. I know this is difficult to process, but the operation was successful because of your team's professionalism, including your response to the equipment failure. The target that was eliminated had been responsible for coordinating attacks that killed dozens of American and Allied forces. What about the original mission? The Taliban commander in the valley. He was eliminated by drone strikes 6 hours after your extraction. The delay was necessary to maintain the cover story and ensure that Mackenzie's operation remained undetected. The revelation that their original target had been eliminated anyway made the deception even more difficult to accept. Maria had been led to believe that their mission failure had allowed a dangerous enemy to escape, adding to her frustration and sense of failure. Hayes continued, The reason you're here is that we need to understand what you plan to do with the information you've gathered. Your observations and Morrison's recordings could compromise ongoing operations if they become public. Maria realized she was at a crossroads that would define the rest of her military career, so she could accept the explanation and remain silent about what she had witnessed, effectively becoming complicit in the deception. Or she could insist on pursuing the matter through official channels, potentially damaging her career and exposing classified operations. What are my options? She asked. You can accept a transfer to a new assignment with a promotion and additional specialized training. Your knowledge of this operation would be helpful in future similar missions. Or you can return to your unit with the understanding that any disclosure of classified information will result in prosecution under the Espionage Act. The choice was clearly designed to encourage cooperation while making the consequences of resistance extremely serious. Maria understood that her military career hung in the balance, But she also recognized that accepting Hayes's offer would fundamentally change her role within the special operations community. I need time to consider this. You have 48 hours to decide. During that time, you'll remain here under security restrictions. You cannot communicate with your unit or family members until this matter is resolved. As Maria was escorted to temporary quarters, she reflected on the events that had brought her to this point. The weapon sabotage that had initially seemed like a betrayal by a teammate had actually been part of an elaborate deception orchestrated at the highest levels of government. Her skills as a marksman had been exploited not to complete a mission, but to provide credible cover for someone else's operation. The next 48 hours would force her to decide whether she could accept being used as a tool in operations she didn't fully understand, or whether her principles required her to resist regardless of the personal consequences. The choice would determine not only her immediate future, but her ability to serve with integrity in an organization that had demonstrated its willingness to deceive its own personnel for operational advantage. During her first night at Fort Bragg, Maria lay awake considering the ethical implications of what she had learned. The operation had achieved its objective and potentially saved American lives, but the methods used raised serious questions about accountability and trust within the military structure. The fact that she had been deliberately deceived by her own command made it difficult to evaluate the legitimacy of the operation objectively. By morning, Maria had reached a decision that would affect the rest of her military service and her understanding of her role within the special operations community. The choice she made would echo through her career and influence her relationship with the military hierarchy for years to come. Maria's decision came to her during the early hours of her second morning at Fort Bragg. As dawn broke over the North Carolina pine forests, she realized that her choice had been made not through careful deliberation, but through a fundamental understanding of who she was as a soldier and a person. When Colonel Hayes arrived for their scheduled meeting, Maria was ready with her answer. "I'll accept the transfer and the new assignment," she said without preamble. "But I have conditions." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "You're not in a position to negotiate conditions, Staff Sergeant." "With respect, Colonel, I think I am. You need my cooperation and silence, and I need to be able to serve with integrity. If we can find common ground, we both get what we need." Hayes leaned back in her chair, clearly intrigued by Maria's approach. "What are your conditions?" "First, I want full disclosure about any future operations I'm involved in. No more deception or manipulation. Second, I want Morrison transferred with me if he chooses to come. He's earned the right to know what he witnessed and to make his own decision about his future. Third, I want assurance that similar operations won't involve deceiving our own personnel unless absolutely necessary." "The first two conditions are possible," Hayes replied after considering. "The third goes beyond my authority, but I can ensure your concerns are communicated to the appropriate decision-makers." Maria nodded. "Then we have an agreement." The transfer process moved with surprising speed. Within a week, Maria found herself assigned to a specialized unit at Fort Bragg that she learned was officially designated as the Advanced Marksmanship Training Detachment, but was known informally as the Company, among those with appropriate clearances. The company's mission was to provide precision shooting support for the most sensitive special operations missions. Unlike conventional sniper units, which operated as part of larger military formations, the company's shooters worked independently or in very small teams, often in situations where their presence couldn't be officially acknowledged. Morrison chose to accept a similar transfer, and they found themselves working together again within their new unit. The training was unlike anything Maria had experienced during her previous military service. Instead of focusing solely on marksmanship skills, the curriculum included advanced courses in international law, diplomatic protocols, and operational security. "They're training us to be more than just shooters," Morrison observed after their third week at the company. "We're learning to be operators who can function in situations where normal rules don't apply." Maria agreed. The instruction covered scenarios involving cross-border operations, elimination of targets in diplomatically sensitive locations, and coordination with intelligence agencies from multiple countries. It became clear that Mackenzie's shot into Pakistan was just one example of the kind of missions the company regularly conducted. Their first operational assignment came 6 months later. Intelligence had identified a terrorist financier who was operating from a compound in a country where U.S. military action wasn't politically feasible. The target had been responsible for funding attacks across multiple countries, but diplomatic efforts to secure his arrest had been unsuccessful. Maria's mission was to eliminate the target during a meeting he was scheduled to attend at a remote location. The shot would be taken from across a border, ensuring that no U.S. personnel would be present in the target country when the operation occurred. The distance was projected to be approximately 3,200 meters, challenging but well within Maria's capabilities, with the advanced equipment the company provided. Unlike her previous mission in Afghanistan, this operation was conducted with full disclosure and careful planning that included all team members. Maria understood exactly what she was being asked to do and why conventional military or diplomatic approaches weren't viable. The ethical weight of the mission was significant, but the transparency allowed her to make an informed decision about her participation. The operation was successful. Maria's shot eliminated a target who had been beyond the reach of conventional law enforcement and military action. Intelligence reports later indicated that the financier's death significantly disrupted terrorist operations across 3 different countries, potentially preventing attacks that could have killed hundreds of civilians. Over the following 2 years, Maria participated in 12 similar operations. Each mission involved eliminating targets who posed significant threats but were protected by diplomatic immunity, geographic isolation, or political complications that prevented conventional action. The work was challenging both technically and ethically, but the transparency and careful selection of targets allowed Maria to serve with a clear conscience. The revelation about Mackenzie's original shot into Pakistan eventually came full circle when Maria learned the identity of his target. The terrorist leader he had eliminated had been planning a coordinated series of attacks against U.S. embassies in multiple countries. Intelligence indicated that the attacks would have occurred within days of Mackenzie's shot, potentially killing hundreds of American diplomats and local staff. The weapon sabotage was wrong, Colonel Hayes admitted during one of their periodic debriefings. We've changed our protocols to ensure that operators are fully informed about their missions, even when operational security requires compartmentalization. Maria appreciated the acknowledgement, but she understood that the ethical challenges of their work would never be completely resolved. The company's missions existed in gray areas where normal rules and procedures couldn't adequately address the threats they faced. Success required balancing effectiveness against accountability, and those decisions would always involve difficult ethical choices. Morrison proved to be exceptionally skilled at the intelligence analysis aspects of their work. His ability to interpret atmospheric conditions and predict weather patterns made him invaluable for planning extreme-range shots, and he eventually became one of the company's primary mission planners. The partnership they had developed during their original deployment in Afghanistan evolved into one of the most effective operator teams within their unit. 3 years after the incident in Afghanistan, Maria received a message that Mackenzie wanted to meet with her privately. They arranged to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop near Fort Liberty where they could talk without attracting attention. "I owe you an explanation," Mackenzie said without preamble when they sat down, and an apology. Maria had wondered for years what she would say if she ever had the opportunity to confront Mackenzie directly. Now that the moment had arrived, she found herself more curious than angry. "Tell me about the shot," she said simply. Mackenzie's face showed a mixture of pride and regret. 4,527 meters. Perfect atmospheric conditions, but still the most difficult shot I've ever attempted. The target was smaller than a dime through the scope, and the bullet drop was over 700 feet. Who was the target? Khalid al-Mansouri. Intelligence indicated he was planning embassy attacks that would have made 9/11s look small by comparison. We had maybe a 6-hour window when he was vulnerable, and diplomatic channels hadn't been able to touch him for 3 years. Maria nodded, understanding the tactical and strategic importance of the shot. Why the deception? Why not just brief the whole team? Mackenzie's expression became uncomfortable. Orders from above. They wanted plausible deniability if something went wrong. Your team's genuine reaction to mission failure provided perfect cover for what really happened. Who sabotaged my rifle? CIA technical team. They flew in specifically for that task and extracted immediately afterward. None of your unit personnel were involved. The revelation was simultaneously a relief and a source of renewed anger. While Maria was glad that none of her teammates had betrayed her, The fact that unknown operatives had deliberately compromised her equipment was still disturbing. "Do you regret it?" she asked. Mackenzie considered the question carefully. "I regret the deception. You deserve to know what was happening." But the shot itself? Al-Mansouri's death prevented attacks that would have killed hundreds of people. "I can live with that." Maria understood Mackenzie's perspective, even if she didn't completely agree with his methods. The world of special operations often required accepting imperfect solutions to complex problems. The key was ensuring that the choices made could be justified both tactically and ethically. "What are you doing now?" she asked. "Teaching at the company. Extreme range shooting and mission planning. Turns out there's more demand for those skills than you might expect." They talked for another hour, sharing experiences from their respective careers since Afghanistan. Despite the circumstances of their first encounter, Maria found herself respecting Mackenzie's expertise and his willingness to accept responsibility for the deception that had affected her. As they prepared to leave, Mackenzie offered one final observation. "The work we do isn't perfect, and the methods aren't always clean. But sometimes the alternative to taking a difficult shot is watching innocent people die. That's the burden we accept when we serve in units like the company." Maria left the meeting with a clearer understanding of the events that had shaped her career and the choices that had brought her to her current assignment. The weapons sabotage would always represent a betrayal of trust, but she had learned to view it within the context of a larger mission that had achieved important strategic objectives. 5 years after the incident in Afghanistan, Maria was promoted to Sergeant First Class and given command of her own team within the company. Her reputation for both technical expertise and ethical leadership made her a natural choice for the most sensitive missions. She had learned to balance the demands of operational effectiveness with the need for accountability and transparency. The desert wind that had carried the scent of deception on that day in Afghanistan had eventually led her to a role where she could help ensure that similar operations were conducted with greater integrity and respect for the personnel involved. While the ethical challenges of special operations would never be completely resolved, Maria's experience had contributed to improved protocols that better balanced mission requirements with the rights and welfare of the operators asked to carry them out. Morrison remained her primary spotter and mission planner, and together they had achieved a success rate that was unmatched within their unit. The trust and communication they had developed during that first betrayal in Afghanistan had evolved into a professional partnership that served as a model for other teams within the company. The 500-meter shot that Mackenzie had taken years earlier remained a legendary achievement within the special operations community. But for Maria, the more important legacy was the lessons learned about leadership, trust, and the responsibility that came with the extraordinary capabilities their unit possessed. The weapon sabotage had been a violation of trust, but it had ultimately led to improvements in how similar operations were planned and executed. As she reflected on her journey from that morning on an Afghan mountainside to her current position as a team leader within the company, Maria understood that the choices made during moments of crisis often determined the trajectory of an entire career. Her decision to seek truth rather than revenge, and to demand transparency rather than blind obedience, had shaped not only her own future, but contributed to positive changes within the special operations community. The desert wind had carried more than deception that day. It had also carried the seeds of integrity that would influence how America's most sensitive military operations were conducted for years to come.